Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are strapping in for, well, an intellectual journey that sits right at the very edge of the known. It's a truly unique source material we're tackling. Foundational stuff.
Absolutely. We're digging into something that really kicked off a whole phenomenon,
Mhm.
spanning decades.
Exactly. And this isn't just theory, it's the raw transcript. We're looking at a first contact situation, basically.
That is correct. We're going right back to December 2nd, 1963. We're examining the literal transcript of Session 1 from the early sessions, Book 1 of the Seth material.
Okay.
And this session, it's pivotal, really pivotal, because it's the point where the participants, Jane Roberts and her husband, Rob Butts, they shifted from getting, well, mostly chaos, random outputs,
Right.
to what they actually documented as coherent, detailed, and maybe astonishingly verifiable communication. It's like the origin story for everything Seth that came later.
So our mission today, for you, the listener, is to kind of unpack this foundational session. It's incredibly detailed. We want to do it in a relaxed, contemplative way, maybe a bit chilling even.
Yeah, there's definitely an atmosphere to it.
We're treating this single night almost like the first chapter of a mystery novel, focusing hard on the specific facts they got and the initial guidance that sort of set the course for them.
Mhm.
And before we dive in, full credit where it's due, the Seth material and the publisher, New Awareness Network.
Definitely. And we really do encourage you, if you're interested, study the Seth material books yourself.
Yeah.
The depth, especially in these early transcripts, it's remarkable. You can visit the New Awareness Network website and bookstore. It's at sethcenter.com/the early sessions/the early sessions. Lots there.
Absolutely check that out. And just so you know, this deep dive, it's distributed free of charge on all major platforms. It's purely for educational purposes because the sheer amount of specific, kind of testable information here, it really demands a close look and impartial one.
Sure.
Okay, let's unpack this. We should probably introduce the people involved first, the sitters, the method.
Yeah, good idea. So the sitters, as they're called, were primarily the author Jane Roberts. She was the one developing as the medium, and her husband, Robert Butts, he was the recorder. Meticulous guy.
Right, he took down everything.
Everything. Their method was pretty simple, really. An alphabet board, like a Ouija board, but maybe homemade, and a pointer. Jane would guide it, apparently while in a developing trance state. And Rob, he recorded verbatim everything the pointer spelled out.
Including the garbled bits.
Oh, yeah. The gibberish, the mistakes, the corrections later on. That's why these early sessions are so valuable. That careful, almost clinical recording approach.
Okay, and just to be clear, the famous entity, Seth, he doesn't actually show up yet, right? Not in this session.
No, not yet. But the journey, this whole thing, it doesn't start cleanly on December 2nd. The notes actually begin a few days earlier with basically static, #tag-I, the precursors to contact, November 26, 1963.
Yeah, the run-up, November 26th.
That's where the unusual atmosphere really kicks in.
Mm-hmm.
A week before this session 1 we're focusing on, Jane and Rob were just experimenting with the board and the output, almost entirely chaotic. Rob Butts' notes just call it gibberish, plain and simple.
Yeah, I looked at the transcript snippet. It's fascinating. It really reads like a broken telegraph or something. A set ESGDP read, re-Great War at Coffinaroa, air rest.
It's just noise.
Exactly. And if you were just, looking at that cold as a skeptic, you'd probably dismiss it. Random noise, maybe some subconscious stuff bubbling up. Easy to do.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
There is. And this is where you have to put on your investigator hat. Because sprinkled in that word soup were these distinct, specific phrases, words that showed up repeatedly, seemingly out of nowhere. The sitters themselves, they specifically highlighted Eastern and Rhodes. Both those words appeared twice in all that jumble.
Okay, Eastern Rhodes. Still sounds a bit random. Maybe. But then, even more striking, maybe more unsettling, were these military terms that emerged. Great War, fights, and battalion.
Whoa, okay. That is different. Suddenly it's not just noise. Great War, battalion.
Right, and that's where the mood shifts, like you said, from just experimenting to something a bit unnerving.
Right.
Why, if they were hoping for, philosophy or spiritual wisdom, why would the very first bits of vocabulary coming through be about conflict, war, geography?
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
The initial frame, even in its most jumbled state, it feels historical and kind of heavy. It almost implies that whatever or whoever was trying to connect had this specific vocabulary, maybe leaning into a past era, defined by conflict or movement.
And the sitters notice this.
Oh, yeah. They immediately thought, okay, this feels less like pure randomness and more like a signature, something trying to assert itself even through the noise.
And they jump to a conclusion. or a hypothesis.
Their immediate thought, which is pretty fascinating looking back, was that these specific disconnected words might be the very first groping attempts of Frank Watts, the entity who properly introduces himself just a few days later.
So they already felt like it was someone specific trying to get through, even in the gibberish stage.
That's the key insight from this preliminary session, I think. If you think of communication like tuning an old radio, this was the static, right, the crackles, but also those little bursts of a recognizable melody, even if faint. It suggests the entity, Watts, had a consistent identity before the communication channel cleared up.
Which lends credibility to the idea it wasn't just them making it up as they went along.
Exactly. It validates their recording process, too. They didn't just write down the neat, tidy answers later. They documented the messy start, the heavy, chaotic beginning before things calmed down.
It does set a chilling expectation, though. The first hint of contact isn't, love and light. It's echoes of Great War and Battalion. It signals that maybe this channel, once it stabilizes, might have some specific, maybe historical baggage or perspective.
That's a really crucial analytical point. The specific words, the fact they repeated, it suggests a coherence that the rest of the gibberish just doesn't have. It forces you to ask, if this was just the subconscious playing tricks, why start with military code? Why not, greetings from angels or something more expected?
Right. Why not something more aligned with what they might have wanted to hear?
Precisely. These disjointed historical terms, they hint at an identity that doesn't immediately line up with the sitter's own expectations, maybe, which paradoxically makes it feel a bit more real.
Okay, so that brings us to December 2nd, the actual session 1. The setup is Jane and Rob sitting facing each other, hands on the pointer board. But they don't ask anything right away.
No, they just waited, trying to let the signal, whatever it was, stabilize after that earlier static. And then, slowly, the pointer begins to move.
Still a bit garbled at first.
A little, yeah. The notes say it was still somewhat unclear initially. But then they got methodical. They decided to try and anchor the process, ask a direct question, and they aimed high, reaching for a name familiar in psychic circles back then.
They asked, "Are you there, Edgar Cayce?"
They did. A logical place to start, maybe?
Yes.
But the response immediately corrected them. No case. Instead, the pointer spelled out the initials, FW.
Frank Watts.
Frank Watts. Contact established. And what came next is really what makes this session stand out. It's not philosophy.
No, it's like you said, it's a census report, a biography.
Exactly. The entity, FW, immediately starts providing this stream of dense biographical data. It's like if the goal was to establish credibility, he chose the most mundane, verifiable path imaginable. Just sheer, meticulous detail about his life.
Okay, let's go through this. Because the specificity, like you say, that feels key to the whole session's vibe, it's credibility.
Absolutely.
So Frank Watts states he died in 1942, age 74, which means, doing the math, born 1885.
Correct. And his wife, Ursula Tordo, he gives her name, born 1888, died later, 1954, at age 75. He says he was English, but lived most of his life in the U.S.
And his job?
A working professional, grade school teacher. Taught English for 34 years, specifically in Elmira, New York.
Elmira, okay.
And he even gives the school street name initially as Straight Street, S-T-R-A-T-E. That gets corrected later, which is actually another fascinating detail in itself, the correction process.
We'll come back to the corrections. So family structure.
Yep, typical nuclear family for the era. Married to Ursula Tordo, who he specifies was Italian, and they had 3 children, Doris, Saros, and Edward.
Doris, Saros, Edward, okay.
And this is where it gets, quite specific and kind of poignant. The detail about the kids. He confirms 2 are still alive, but 1, Saros, is dead.
Oh, okay.
And he gives the details. Saros died in 1936 at the age of 3, just 3 years old.
Well,
there was even a moment of confusion. The sitters initially thought the pointer spelled out 33 for the age, but Watts immediately corrected them, spelled out no. Then confirmed, Saros was just 3 then, yes.
That correction. That's really something. The difference between 33 and 3 is not a minor slip.
It's profoundly important, I think. It shows the entity or the communication channel actively pushing back against a potential misinterpretation by the sitters. It insists on this very specific, verifiable, and also deeply painful detail, the death of a toddler.
Yeah.
And you have to ask, if the subconscious was just inventing this character, why invent such a grounded, traceable, and frankly sad tragedy for a small-town teacher? What narrative purpose does that serve, unless it's just true?
That specificity is the first big puzzle of session 1, isn't it?
It really is. It puts the role of specificity right at the forefront of credibility. It's hard to imagine maintaining that level of consistent, kind of unromantic yet emotionally charged data if it were purely made up on the fly.
But we also have to talk about the moments where it wasn't clear, right? The glitches in the system.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And acknowledging those is crucial. It wasn't perfect communication. There were moments where the channel clearly struggled, which ironically kind of adds to the feeling of authenticity maybe. It wasn't too slick.
Okay, let's look at those glitches. If Frank Watts is this coherent entity providing detailed bioinfo, why struggle with basic names? When they asked for the city he died in, the board just spelled out FQTP.
Yeah, pure gibberish. FQTP means nothing.
And when they asked for clarification on that street name, Srigati, the answer was no QE. Again, meaningless. Doesn't that suggest the communication is being filtered, maybe through Jane's own mind, her subconscious, which just breaks down when it hits data it doesn't actually possess?
That's the core tension, isn't it? The friction points, the gibberish, the misspellings, like later he spells dimension, dimension, it all suggests it's not pure dictation. Something is filtering it, struggling with specific linguistic packets, especially proper nouns, maybe abstract concepts.
Right.
But if the subconscious was fully in control, why not just fill in the blanks smoothly? Why not invent a common city name? Or just stick with Straight Street? Why produce FQTP or no QE?
That's the counter-argument, the inability to transmit those specific nouns cleanly. It could suggest a genuine external source struggling against the limits of the board, the trance state, whatever the mechanism was, rather than just a flawless internal invention that occasionally decides to throw in some nonsense.
Exactly. It points towards a difficulty in transmission, perhaps. And there's one more example of this struggle. They asked for the name of a child they might know personally. The response was odd. Pardon, Otad, need pardon?
Otad, O-T-A-D-E?
Yeah. The pitters noted, okay, maybe Otad could rearrange to date, but the message is clearly obscured. It's another reminder that even when this channel seemed open, clarity wasn't guaranteed. It took patience, interpretation, and sometimes it just failed.
Okay, so we've got the basic biography, the glitches, the poignant details, but then Watts starts connecting his past life directly to the sitter's present. In Elmira. This is where it feels like the investigation could really start checking these links.
Indeed, this is where it gets intricate. Watts mentions his birthplace was 243 State Street in Elmira. Okay, a specific address. Then he reveals the initials of the person currently living in that house. S.A.
Just initials.
At first. They prompted him, asked for the full name, and he spelled it out. Sam Towson. S-A-M-T-O-W-S-O-N.
Sam Towson, okay.
And this is the start of what you could call the Elmira network, his whole constellation of connections that seems really tightly interwoven.
So who is Sam Towson, according to Watts?
Watts immediately detailed the relationship. Sam Towson was a retired doctor of medicine, a physician, and crucially, they had been friends for an incredible 43 years.
43 years, that's a long friendship.
A lifetime, almost. And the sitters asked a key question. Does Watts still watch over Towson? The answer was a simple, direct yes.
Wow.
And then they asked why. Why watch over him? And this is where we got the longest, coherent answer they'd received up to that point. A simple, but really profound statement. Because we were friends.
Because we were friends.
Yeah. That simple sentence, it defines the motivation. It suggests that personal bonds, loyalty, friendship, they somehow persist beyond death. It establishes this early theme of enduring connection right there in session 1.
But the network gets even tighter, doesn't it? Almost suspiciously tight.
It does get very interconnected.
Okay.
Watts then provides details about his own daughter, Doris, the one who is still alive. He says she lives in Schenectady, another town in New York. And guess who she's married to?
Let me guess. Related to Sam Towson.
Dick Towson, Sam Towson's son.
Get out. So the dead friend's daughter is married to the living friend's son.
Exactly. The two families, Watts and Towson, still intimately linked, decades after Frank Watts himself died. That detail, I mean, it's either an astonishing coincidence, right? Or maybe it's presented as intentional proof, confirmation of a deep bond that somehow continues.
It feels like something you'd write in a novel to tie things up neatly.
It does have that feel. And the detail about Doris gets even more specific, more intimate. She lives at 2427 Train Street in Schenectady. That's after an initial attempt where the board spelled Gippy Street, another example of that proper noun struggle, then a correction.
Gippy Street to Train Street. Okay.
And furthermore, they're told Doris had 2 marriages.
Right, which explained the grandchildren situation.
Exactly. Her first marriage ended in divorce. The board spelled that out. That produced a grandson, Tim, who was 18. Then the second marriage, to Dick Towson, produced a granddaughter, Patricia, age 4.
18 and 4. Big age gap. highly specific family history details, ages, marital status, addresses, divorce.
And this is the question for you, the listener, putting on that investigator hat again. How could Jane Roberts' subconscious, supposedly, invent the specific, verifiable life details, the addresses, the family dramas of a deceased English teacher's daughter, and her connection to a retired doctor, all happening in Elmira and Schenectady, places the sitters likely didn't know intimately?
Yeah, you'd assume they didn't have deep personal knowledge of all these people.
The material's practically begging to be checked, you know. It lays out all these checkable facts.
And there was one more connection, closer to home.
Yes. Finally, Watts confirmed knowing a woman named Florence Callahan. And Florence Callahan lived in the front apartment of the very house Jane and Rob were sitting in during the session.
Oh, okay, that brings it right into the room.
Doesn't it? He identified the relationship simply as friend of a family, bringing the whole spectral connection, this Elmira network, right to their doorstep.
Did he say if she knew he was around?
That leads to one of the most, well, reflective moments in session 1, the idea of unseen guardianship. They asked if Watts watches over Miss Callahan. Answer, yes. But then they asked, does she know he watches over her? The response was a clear, definitive no.
No, she has no idea.
None, according to Watts. And that detail feels existentially significant, doesn't it? It suggests that entities like Frank Watts might maintain this. Protective awareness, maybe? Over people, without them having any clue? It opens up the idea of this whole other sphere of activity happening right alongside us, totally unnoticed by the person being watched over.
That is a chilling thought. Constant unseen companionship or guardianship.
And he even gave the last time he supposedly saw her alive, 1943.
Yeah.
Which is significant because
he stated he died in 1942.
Exactly. Seeing her in 1943 reinforces the idea that his experience of death didn't just cut him off completely. He wasn't immediately removed from the sphere of people he knew or their timeline. The proximity, the connection was somehow maintained, at least for a while. Hashtag Freefy. Advice, dimensions, and the purpose of the contact.
Okay, so after spending, maybe over an hour of this session just laying out his credentials, his life, death, friends, daughter, addresses, like establishing his bona fides in the most grounded way possible.
Yeah, building that foundation of mundane detail.
They finally pivot. They start asking the bigger questions. Why? Why this contact? Why him, Frank Watts?
And Watts' answer, his explicit reason, it was directed entirely at Jane and Rob themselves. Their own efforts, their interest. He spelled out, because you take an interest in psychic phenomena. Simple as that.
So his goal wasn't just to share his life story.
Apparently not. It was more like opening a door for them. Offering contact for us, that's the phrase, with spurts, which they took to mean spirits or the dead or even alm, maybe meaning all. He positioned himself as like the initial guide, the first point of contact into a wider network of consciousness.
And did he offer any advice on how to proceed?
Immediately. He started giving guidance on the usefulness of their psychic efforts, specifically emphasizing telepathy. He told them, and this quote feels like it defines the practical work ahead for them, vital telepathy has power for good.
Vital telepathy has power for good. Okay, that's interesting. It gives it a purpose.
It does. That phrase, power for good, it immediately sets up this kind of moral, ethical framework for everything that might follow. It implies these developing abilities aren't just for kicks, not just parlor tricks or curiosity. There should be a proactive tool, maybe to help others. It shifts the whole dynamic from just investigation to something more like a mission.
Did he give them any feedback on their own abilities?
He did. Not just abstract advice, but immediate validation. He assured them about their potential, telling them they had fair ability both, Jane and Rob both.
Fair ability. Not amazing, but fair. Realistic, maybe?
Seems so. And his instruction was simple, practical. Bored, try again and again. Just keep doing it. He emphasized persistence, making sure they wouldn't get discouraged by the early failures, the gibberish. Just keep trying.
And how did he say they could learn deeper truths, help others?
The path, he suggested, was through total engagement, focused effort. When asked how to learn truths and help, his guidance was pretty all-encompassing. Study, listen, try to do all, read all, everything.
Wow. Okay, so basically, immerse yourselves completely.
Yeah. It's a foundational message. Comprehensive intellectual and spiritual effort. Truth isn't just handed over on a platter. You have to actively go after it. Read everything, listen, try.
What's really fascinating, though, is the assurance he apparently gave that truth isn't hidden away somewhere else.
Right. Watts affirmed they could access truth right here, right now on Earth, if they simply ask and it will be shown.
Yeah.
That's a powerful statement. It kind of democratizes the whole quest for knowledge. It argues the answers are accessible through your own conscious intention and effort, not just by talking to spirits.
Okay, so practical advice, encouragement, and then a shift.
And then, yeah, a pretty dramatic shift.
Yeah.
We move from the mundane guidance into the truly metaphysical stuff.
Yeah.
Laying the groundwork for the complexity that would define the later Seth material. Frank Watts briefly touches on the nature of time existence from his perspective. They asked him if he has a sense of time, like we do. He said no, flat out. When they asked why, he clarified, time for us is different. The core problem, the intellectual challenge for us, he suggested, is simply that our perspective is off for us.
Perspective is off for us.
That's a gentle way to introduce nonlinear reality, I guess.
Very gentle. And then he introduced the big one, the concept of dimensions. He mentioned the fourth dimension, F-O-R-T-H-D-I-M-I-N-S-O-N, and fifth dimension.
Dimension again. That spelling struggle.
Exactly. But the concepts are huge, right? Especially for 1963. This wasn't common parlance in popular culture then. When they pressed him for what the fifth dimension is, he defined it simply as space, and then clarified. Fifth space.
Fifth space, okay.
Yeah.
Still pretty abstract.
Very. But the core idea is planted. There are realities beyond our usual 3 spatial dimensions. And maybe these other dimensions, these other spaces, are accessible to human consciousness.
It feels like a very deliberate transition by the entity, doesn't it? It really does. It's like, okay, I've spent the first half proving I was this ordinary guy, Frank Watts from Elmira. Check my references. Now that you hopefully accept that, let's start talking cosmology. He shifts seamlessly from the mundane to the metaphysical, introducing this multidimensional structure that would become absolutely central to the later Seth teachings. The validation part is done, the instruction part begins. Hashtag tag BEV, the prophecy of Jane's book.
So the session is winding down, but there's one last major piece, a really startling high-stakes moment. Frank Watts offers a prediction about Jane.
Yes, a very immediate, highly specific prediction about Jane Roberts' own literary work.
She was working on a book at the time.
She was, working hard on a book outlining her own developing philosophy, her personal theory of reality. The notes say she called it her theory of the world as idea construction. Pretty heady stuff even before Seth.
And Watts knew about this.
He affirmed knowledge of it immediately, which you can imagine must have been incredibly validating for Jane. Suddenly, this psychic contact is directly linking to her life's passion, her creative work.
What did he think of the book?
His opinion was clear, good. He thought the book was good, but he didn't stop there. He then issued this incredibly clear, specific, and crucially testable prophecy about it.
He said,
Will publish. Flat out, it will be published.
wow, that's bold.
Bolder still, it wasn't just a vague, oh, it'll get published someday. This was practically a publication schedule and forecast, presented with meticulous detail. He named the publisher, initially Harcourt Brace, which they later clarified was Harcourt Brace.
Harcourt Brace, a major publisher.
Okay. He predicted the year of publication, 1966, just 3 years away. And he even predicted the scope, 3 volumes, 3 volumes.
Publisher, date, volume count, that is incredibly specific.
It really is. To offer a prophecy like that, it's not just predicting success, it's putting everything on the line. The entire channel, the credibility of Frank Watts, it's immediately tied to this single real-world outcome happening within 3 years. That takes, I don't know, immense confidence. Or maybe, from the entity's view, just adherence to known facts.
It's a massive gamble if it's just a guess. Did he predict sales?
He did. He provided success metrics. Predicted readership of 60,000. 60,000 readers.
60,000. Specific number again.
Although, when they asked if there would be more than 60,000, his reply was interesting. Who knows? Which injects this little touch of realism, maybe humility. Not everything is set in stone.
Okay. And what about critics? How did he think it would be received?
He predicted that too, with a pretty balanced view. He gave an early look at how Jane's work, especially being linked to psychic phenomena, might be received. Some amazed, some scornful.
Some amazed, some scornful. That sounds pretty realistic, actually. For any groundbreaking or controversial material, it wouldn't be universal praise.
Exactly. It feels like a grounded prediction. And this whole segment, the prophecy, it really solidifies Jane's role in all this. The source notes mention that Watts also affirmed something important during this part.
What was that?
He confirmed that Jane was actually already receiving his thoughts before the pointer even spelled them out. illustrating how quickly her own mediumistic abilities were apparently developing just within this single session.
So she was becoming the medium even as they were talking about mediumship in her future book.
Precisely. The confirmation earlier that they had fair ability both, and then this immediate prediction of her literary success. It links the psychic contact directly to her tangible, ambitious project. It moves the whole thing from just a weird experiment or curiosity into a defined, high-stakes mission for them.
Okay. How did the session finally end?
It concluded at 12:40 a.m., pretty late night, and it ended with a final, simple directive for their next meeting. Wed-9 night, Wednesday, 9 p.m., reinforcing this organized, almost scheduled nature of the contact.
So from start to finish, quite a journey in one night.
An astonishing amount of ground covered, from that chaotic static and military words to a full biographical profile, foundational metaphysics about dimensions, and a detailed literary prophecy. Session 1 is dense.
So yeah, we started with basically jumbled military code gibberish, and we ended with a precise 3-part book publishing prophecy, publisher, date, sales figures, critical reception. The arc of just session 1 is kind of a roadmap, isn't it? From total uncertainty to clear, actionable, and potentially checkable information.
Absolutely. We've walked through the really extensive biographical details Frank Watts provided the teacher, the tragic death of his son Saros, that intricate Elmira network connecting his past life to their present. And we covered the initial guidance too, the vital telepathy, the power for good, and that critical first mention of other dimensions of fifth space.
And it's that sheer volume of specific, grounded, potentially verifiable stuff that makes session 1 so essential if you're trying to understand the Seth material phenomenon, I think. It lays the groundwork for all the extraordinary stuff that comes later by first saturating the conversation in the completely ordinary.
It's a fascinating strategy if you think of it that way. Build credibility through the mundane before launching into the cosmos. And again, we really do encourage you, the listener, to study the source material yourself. This deep dive is educational, but the original transcripts hold so much texture.
Absolutely. Full credit again to the Seth material and the publisher New Awareness Network. You can find those resources, the early sessions included, at sethcenter.com/the-early-sessions. Check it out.
It's worth your time if this intrigues you at all.
Okay, so as we wrap up, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought, something to mull over based purely on the evidence of this very first contact.
Right. Think about this. Session 1, as we've discussed, is just dominated by these verifiable mundane details.
Yeah.
Birthdays, jobs, the specific age of a child who died decades ago, street addresses, the age gap between 2 grandkids living in Schenectady, just tons of it.
Yeah, the bulk of the session is that stuff.
So the question is this. If Frank Watts was merely a fiction, right, a persona invented by Jane Roberts' subconscious, or maybe their shared subconscious, why? Why would the subconscious spend so much time and meticulous effort creating this incredibly detailed, checkable history for an ordinary English grade school teacher from Elmira?
Instead of just jumping straight to the cool stuff.
Exactly. Why not skip the boring bio and go right to the philosophy, the dimensions, the book prophecy? What purpose does this massive investment in specific, grounded, almost tedious detail actually serve? If the goal isn't perhaps to validate a genuinely extraordinary communication. So the thought to leave you with is, consider the essential role that this kind of specificity plays in establishing credibility, especially when you're dealing with claims that are, well, pretty far out there. Why the mundane details? What are they really for?